Blunders and Boomerangs. This is actually my favorite chapter in the entire book of winning chess combinations. Blunders and Boomerangs. Well, we all understand what a blunder is. Yeah, you make a mistake. Hey, to err is human. It's going to happen. You're going to make a lot of blunders. Don't beat yourself up. What is really interesting is this concept of the boomerang. Probably a lot of you aren't that familiar with the boomerang, because what happens is we get these books, these tactics books and puzzle books. We see a puzzle and we immediately want to solve it. And we look for a sacrifice, and all sacrifices are good in the puzzle books. In other words, the combinations always work. But you're sitting at a chess game. Nobody's there to tap you on the shoulder and say, now is the moment you have a winning combination. No, it doesn't work that way. You've got to figure it out at the board on your own. And now you're ready to uncork a combination. You're ready to make that sacrifice. But will it work? Well, let's just step back for a moment and understand what we're trying to do when we make a sacrifice. We're trying to show that we had an advantage. We have to have an advantage for a combination to work. So where is our advantage? So before you embark on a combination, you should ask yourself, where am I superior? Do I have superior development? Do I have a safer king? Am I ahead material? What is it that's in your favor that will allow you to make a winning combination? Oftentimes, from the opening, we can ask ourselves the same question, and it's very easy for us to go back and say, gee, that's strange. My opponent hasn't made any clearly defective move, any mistake. So it's probably unlikely that there's going to be a winning combination. But when you get into the middle game, then it becomes very, very hard for you to go back and say, well, where was my opponent's error? What mistake did my opponent make that will allow me a winning combination? A boomerang is when you make a combination that's not winning. It comes back against you. Your sacrifice doesn't work out. The following game was a wonderful example of the boomerang. Vladimir Kramnik uncorked what looked to be pure magic in his game with Mickey Adams as he embarked on a combination that became a boomerang. Let's have a look. And here we go. One of the really marvelous boomerangs that I have witnessed. This was played in the third round of the MTEL chess tournament in Sofia, Bulgaria in 2005. And again, as I mentioned, Mickey Adams was white. And the game began in a Petrov or Russian defense. Black counterattacks the pawn on e4, not bothering to defend his pawn on e5. And the play continued for quite some time in a very fashionable line in those days of the Petrov defense, as both players rather played fairly quickly to get to the following. Again, a very standard position. Bishop f4, rook c8, all of these moves were well known. And after the move bishop f6, knight d2, we can see what Mickey was trying to achieve. His pawns on c3 and d4 make a very nice fence. They guard against this bishop on f6 as well as this knight on c6. As long as the pawns are on c3 and d4, the knight on c6 isn't feeling particularly great, as all of the good squares are covered. The move knight d2, on the other hand, it's very clear that Mickey wants to play bishop f3, activating his bishop, attacking this knight on c6, and x-raying the pawn on b7. Once the bishop gets to the f3 square, the knight is ready to jump to e4. Game continued. Queen a5, queen c1, and we have laid the tables for this remarkable combination that Vladimir Kramnik uncorked. Before Vladimir played this move, I was really stunned that he made the decision to play the move. Because if you look at all of the moves up to this moment, all the preceding moves, none of them suggested that White had made a fault or a mistake of any kind. Indeed, all of White's moves were, as we would say, theoretically approved. Now, with this move, queen c1, again, this knight is ready to jump, knight to c4, attacking the queen. The queen is rather awkward, not too many squares. This knight might come back to e3 with a tempo. This queen is prepared to go to b2, also harassing this pawn on b7 and is. In this position, I was rather expecting a move like, for example, bishop on f6 to g5, putting the knight on d2 in a pin. Also because I thought that the pawns on c3 and d4 were doing a very good job at neutralizing the bishop on f6. But Vladimir uncorked the move. Bishop takes d4, a shocking move by Vladimir Kramnik as he uncorks a sacrifice from a clear blue sky. From Mickey's point of view, his world was really rocked by the sacrifice, and he could only gain the confidence that the sacrifice was unsound by trusting that previous to this moment, he hadn't made a mistake. If we go back to where Vladimir made this capture on d4, we have to understand his thinking. He was looking for something in the position that was advantageous for him for the sacrifice to work. And what that something was that after he takes on d4, in his mind, he was seeing that the bishop on e2 is under attack, the rook on e1 as well as the move knight c2, forking the rooks, or in case the bishop moves from e2, the knight will attack the queen on e1 as well as the rook on a1. An easy combination to spot, but now from Mickey's point of view, what he's got to do is find the solution. If the bishop has to move, well, move it to a square where it has a meaningful impact. And with the move bishop c4, that's certainly the case, as White is targeting this f7 pawn. What would have happened if White had obliged Vladimir and simply retreated his bishop to the f1 square and not to the attractive c4 square? Well, in this case, the combination works brilliantly well. After trading rooks, now the knight comes to c2, attacking the queen and rook. And after the queen moves, whoops, there goes the rook. And if you capture the knight, then this knight on d2 is hanging. And if you play the move knight to c4, then black has the answer knight to b3, winning material. In this position, Mickey avoided the very tempting move, queen takes f7 check. Do you see why he avoided this move? The problem with queen takes f7 check is that after the king moves, the knight on d2 is under threat, and after the move knight f3, bishop g6, retreating with a tempo against the queen on f7. The queen moves to d7, attacking the rook. But now the rook moves to e8, covering the e5 square, threatening a potential back rank check, as well as preparing the defensive reaction, queen on a5 to f5, protecting the king. Capturing on f7 is a mistake. After the move, king takes g7. It's a very important moment that occurs right here. I really want you to think about this. Many times when you're making a combination, your goal is to improve your pieces so that they have as wide a range of movement as possible. But equally so in a combination, you're often trying to limit your opponent's pieces so that they have a reduced range of possibilities. With that thought in mind, this move, bishop e8 check, is really a brilliant move. Because what it does is it reduces the defensive role that this rook on c8 has. In particular, by playing the bishop to e8 with a discovered check against the king, the rook's defense of the f8 square is covered. Black's king has no choice. It must move up the board, king h6. To retreat with king g8 or king h8 would simply allow a checkmate on f7 and f8. So no choice. King h6, queen f8 check, and the king has to continue up the board, reaching a very critical moment. After the move king g5, white has a brilliant winning move. Can you spot this brilliant winning move? Spoiler alert, here it comes. The winning move is f2, f4 check, giving black a choice to capture with the king or to capture with the queen. Let's get rid of the first one first. If black tries to capture with his king, there's a skewer in the position. Do you see the skewer? Here it comes. The skewer is queen h6 check. The king has to move and the queen on d2 is lost. If you capture with the queen, then we have this very nice move, queen e7 check. What would happen if black presses ahead with the move king g4? I hope you can see how black's king is forced forwards into a checkmating net. Do you see the winning play for white? h2, h3 check, king g3, and this nice retreating move. Queen e1 check. Black has no choice. He must put his queen in the way. But after queen f2 check, queen takes, f2 is checkmate. Come back to that moment after f4 check. What would happen if black's king was to capture the pawn on f4? Well, there's a skewer tactic in the position, and I hope you can find it. Here it comes. Queen h6 check, and after the king moves, then the queen is captured on d2, or Kramnik. Well, as we're about to see, the pawn on a3 is doomed. How so? After black moves his queen, say a move like queen a1, which defends the pawn on a3, white simply captures. the pawn on a3. Bishop takes a3 with the idea that if you play queen takes a3, there's a discover check that will cost black his queen. Do you see it? Knight e5 check to the king. After the knight is captured, the queen will be lost to rook takes a3. Picking up the action in the game between Mickey Adams and Vladimir Kramnik for this Blunders and Boomerangs chapter, the move bishop c4 by Mickey was the start of the refutation to the combination that Vladimir had uncorked. So after bishop c4, Vladimir played the move knight c2, which was not the move that he had intended. Clearly, he wanted to play the move rook takes e1, but only now came to the realization that after queen takes e1, knight c2, very easy to calculate thus far, queen e7, queen takes d2, again, very easy to calculate for Vladimir, check, and queen takes f5 would be a winning position for white. Black does not have the time to capture the rook because queen takes c8 comes with mate. But what Vladimir could calculate was that after queen e7, he could take the rook. That was his initial idea. He began to have the realization that, well, wait a minute. Queen takes f7, I can deal with that. That move doesn't scare me because after king h8, knight f3, I'll be able to play rook e8, and I've got this defensive reaction. Queen a5 to f5 to protect my king and my king side. So instead of queen takes f7, bishop takes f7 check, king is forced to go to h8, and then this brilliant move, bishop e5, attacking the pawn on g7, attacking the knight on a1. Well, what happens if you go queen takes d2? It's an amazing combination, counter-sacrificial combination. And here it comes, bishop g7, king g7, not the move bishop e6 check. Bishop e6 check only ends up making a draw. But instead of this move bishop e6 check, there's a beautiful winning move. And that winning move is the move bishop e8 check. And after further move king h6 check, black's king is forced to walk right into a losing variation. In the game, Vladimir played the move knight c2, forking the rooks. Well, Mickey played rook takes, and moved his rook out of danger with the move rook b1. From Mickey's point of view, he's ready. All he has to do is play the move knight f3, and he will be winning the game. After all, he's a piece up for just 2 pawns. Vladimir was therefore forced to continue rook e1 check, winning white's queen for a rook and a knight. So now the material imbalance is 2 minor pieces and a rook for white, but black has a queen and 2 pawns. The problem is that white's pieces are coordinating really, really well. And for the moment, there is this massive check on the back rank that could lead to checkmate. Therefore, Vladimir had to stop that move with the move king f8, after which knight f3, the knight is no longer under attack. On d2, it protects the rook on e1, and it sets up Now, for the move rook e5, attacking both the bishop on f5 as well as the queen on a5, f7, f6, protecting the e5 square, stopping the move rook e5. But here, unfortunately for Vladimir, is white's piece play is just too powerful. And also, what's intriguing is that while black's king looks pretty okay, close to safe kind of thing, in fact, it's not safe at all. And white's minor pieces and rook are really strong and good at hunting down black's king. Mickey played the move rook to d1. Again, threats of rook d5 and rook d8 adorn white's play. But more importantly, he's getting his rook out of pre from the queen on a5. The move rook d1 also readies the move knight to d4 so that the knight can attack on the e6 square. After queen c5, bishop f1, king e8, knight d4, bishop is forced to retreat, and rook d3. And again, it's not that intuitively obvious that the combination that Vladimir played has boomerang. In fact, though, it really is a very good position for white. White's bishops, rook, and knight really are boss over the queen and the pawns. Also, unfortunately for Vladimir, the pawns are still on the initial position of a7, b7, c7. If the pawns were way up the board, well, we might be talking a different ball game altogether. a5, here we go. h3, just making luft on the king side, and now the race is on. With the move b5, black is doing his best to get his pawns in motion, whereas white will now want to really ratchet up his attack against black's king. Knight b3. First set of problems to set to Vladimir. The pawn on c7 is hanging, as well as the pawn on a5. Really not too much choice in this matter. Queen takes a3, establishing two connected passed pawns. But after bishop takes c7, a5, what else? The pawn on a5 was hanging to either capture. Then the move bishop d6. That's a nasty move that comes with a really powerful gain of tempo. So we can see that white wants to play moves like knight c5, rook e3, going after black's king. After queen b2, knight c5, a3, check. King and knight to d3. Attacking the queen. After queen b1, bishop takes a3. What would have happened on queen a1, protecting the pawn? After bishop takes a3, bishop e6, knight f4, b4. Stopping the rook. There was a very nice checkmating motif I just want to show. In case of bishop to c4, rook e7 check. You don't want to move your king into a discover check. King f8, rook e1 discover check, loses the queen. But if you move the king to g8 to avoid the discovery, there's this very beautiful checkmating pattern with rook e8 check, king f7, rook f8 checkmate. That's a really nice pattern with the knight on f4, the rook on f8, and the bishop on a3 protecting the rook. That was why after bishop e6, knight f4, b4 was what Vladimir chose. Bishop takes, knight takes. Now, the funny part is if there was no knight on the board, White has a near picture-perfect fortress and a very easy draw of rook and bishop versus queen because everything's on one side. Unfortunately for Vladimir, this is one minor piece too many, as the combination of the knight, bishop, and rook easily overcomes Black's resistance. After g6, g3, we can stop here and just say that this was a brilliant boomerang where the combination didn't work for Vladimir Kramnik. That was an amazing game between Michael Adams and Vladimir Kramnik. Not all such combinations are going to be that difficult to refute. In fact, the combinations that boomerang are most often those types of combinations that are tied to pins, which is kind of confusing. So you go and you pin a piece, and then your combination doesn't work because the pin piece can move. And that's the difference between a relative pin and an absolute pin. It's in these relative pins that we really turn off our danger sensor. Let me show you what I mean. This is one of the oldest opening traps in the chess books. Queen's Gambit declined, knight f6, bishop g5. The bishop develops and pins the knight to the queen. Very clear. And after knight d7, White says, I sense opportunity. The knight on f6 defends the pawn on d5, but the knight can't move. If the knight moves, the knight being in a pin is going to lose the queen. So therefore, reasons White, I can simply capture this pawn thanks to the fact that the knight is in a pin and cannot move. White reasons he's won a pawn. Can you see the refutation to this type of thinking? Spoiler alert, here comes the refutation. The refutation is the very surprising knight takes d5. But wait a minute, White says, that can't work. I win the queen. Aren't I winning? And now we take a look and we see what White has miscalculated. His own king is actually quite vulnerable. And once we realize that White's king is vulnerable, then it's very easy for Black to discover the problem with White's knight takes d5 combination. Bishop b4 check, there's no alternative. White has to put his queen in front of his king. He loses his queen, and after king takes, what do we have? But one pawn, just one pawn for a knight. And after e4 and a move like knight f6, this is a completely winning position for the second player. Let's take a look at another boomerang. Our second boomerang is also a pin piece that suddenly moves. This trap comes from the Scandinavian defense with queen takes d5, but this time the Black queen moves all the way back to the home square d8. Queen a5 is the main alternative. And after knight f3, bishop g4, d4, knight c6. This is the bad move. What Black has relied upon is that after d5, knight e5, he thinks that the pin on the knight makes the knight on e5 invulnerable to capture. However, Black is about to be mistaken. Knight takes e5, and after bishop takes d1, bishop check. Whoops. Unlike our previous example, Black is not obliged to block with his queen, but can block with his pawn. And after c6 takes, now things are really rough, because c7, discovered check, is a problem. c6 takes b7, discovered check, and capturing the rook is also a problem. So that the only move, in fact, is the move a7, a6. But in this case, c7 check, discover check, pawn takes b5, pawn takes, or c7 takes d8 equals queen. Reminded of the idea that this is the strongest move in chess. Your pawn takes a queen and becomes a queen as well. It's quite a material reward. c7 takes d8 check, rook takes d8, and knight takes d1, and then you count them up. And there are 3 minor pieces to black's 2 minor pieces, and white wins. The following boomerang is actually a surprise that I had run across by reading an article by Grandmaster Gedezhenko in the New in Chess magazine, and he was talking about a very well-known Russian blitz player who loved to play a very specific sacrifice in a position that I knew, opening that I liked to play. And after c5, d5, he liked to sacrifice his queen. Unlike the previous 2 examples where the player who gave up their queen ended up winning, this is just an example of a queen sacrifice where you're playing for activity, not necessarily for a winning material advantage. Knight takes d5. Well, this is a very big surprise, as the pinned piece moves away and allows the capture of the queen. Well, black captures the knight, and now there is no recapture. You can't recapture on c3 because that would force, as we've seen before, the queen to block, and the queen would be captured. But after knight takes c3, the queen moves away, and after knight e4 check, king over, king takes. Black reasons as follows. Well, I have 2 minor pieces and a pawn for my queen. So 6 plus 1 makes 7. Also, white's king has been compromised. It's been forced to move, losing the rights of castling, and knight takes f2 is a very, very clear threat. I think the sacrifice is unsound. That is to say, I do prefer white's position, but it's one of those sacrifices that you begin to appreciate it the more you look at it. Again, you have sacrificed for 2 minor pieces. There are some immediate threats that white's king is facing, and mostly black's king is going to be very, very safe in the center and or on the queen side. Not recommending it, but I just want to show you that boomerangs are possible in all kinds of settings. Our 4th and final boomerang setting comes from a game that Tigran Petrosian I had seen play, and I just thought it was charming. It comes from an opening, the English, that I play a lot as white, and after the move f5, d4, e4. Well, it's now a very, very big scrappy affair. Bishop comes to g5, attacking the queen. Pieces are beginning to start to hang. Knight f6, d5, takes on f3, takes on c6, takes on g2. So here, white reasons that he doesn't want to be a pawn down. If he plays bishop takes g2, then after takes on c6, he's a pawn down, and his compensation is vague at best. Black is doing fine. So white says, why should I be a pawn down? I'm going to capture on d7 with check, and then on my very next turn, I'll take this pawn before it gets to queen on the h1 squared. Do you see the fault behind c6 takes d7 check? Spoiler alert, here it comes. The very surprising knight takes d7. And again, I found this a very charming trap. This knight on f6 is in a pin. It's not supposed to be able to move. But remember, it's a relative pin. It's not an absolute pin. It doesn't involve the king. And after knight takes d7, suddenly the queen attacks the bishop, but also the double threat is to capture the rook and make a queen. So that after knight takes d7, black wins material. In this position, I had just played the move a2, a4, and I was seeking to expand a little bit on the queen side with the move a5. And here my opponent played an imperceptible error, knight e4, and allowed me to continue with my move a5. In fact, in such circumstances, where a move like a2, a4, or indeed h2, h4 is played, a nice way of countering is to play the move a6, so that in case your opponent continues with a5, you can bypass them with the move b5. What Peter did is after knight e4, he allowed me this move a5. And now I have ideas like a6. If the bishop moves to c6, I have ideas of d5. Also, I have ideas of a5 and knight a3 to b5, pressing against the pawn on a7. After rook b8, knight a3, those threats are becoming severe. After captures, 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 this was actually a capture I was really pleased to see, because after the move knight c4, I'm going to get a very nice pawn structure, whereas my opponent is going to be stuck with a weakness along the a file. And in particular, right here, it's where I played a very good move, queen c2. Didn't want to capture the pawn on a5 right away because of the counterstrike against the b2 pawn. But the queen on c2 meant that the a5 pawn was doomed. And at the same time, I'm harassing the knight on e4. I've just played c7, queen c8. And after queen c8, f4, bishop g7, here I missed a really nice move for myself. Can you do better than what I played? The move that I should have played is the move queen e7, double exclam. The idea is that I want to play check on f7 with my knight, followed by queen g5, check and mate. If black tries to stop that plan, either with bishop takes d4 check, king h2, or rook f6, it doesn't help. I've got this move g2, g4, and I am winning if I had only played it this way with queen e7 and g4. I would have saved myself a lot of trouble. A question for you. What would you have played in case of the move king h5? I had my answer all prepared. I was ready for this. I was hoping to be able to play queen takes h7 check, king runs up the board with king g4, f3 check, king g3, knight e4 check, king f4. And here's the move that I had really liked very much. The king, the black king, is about to waltz its way to the e3 square, and perhaps by sneaking into my camp, somehow magically run away from the power of my knight and queen. But here I have a really good move that shuts the door on black's king, and that move is king f2. Just stopping the move king e3 and prepping the move g3 check, and that is a winner. Here, instead of playing the winning move, queen e7, well, a whole series of misadventures was about to occur when I played the move knight e6. In my mind, this was a tremendous move. In my mind, I was threatening not only the bishop with queen takes g7, but also the king with queen f4 check, followed by queen g5, mate. What I have missed is a fantastic resource. The resource was the move bishop e5. A miss by Peter as well, I'm lucky to say. What's the idea behind the move bishop e5? It's twofold. First, you're stopping queen f4 checkmate. Second, you're giving the king a square on g7. So the idea is that if white captures the bishop, then the knight is captured, and now queen check comes up empty because of king g7. In fact, bishop e5 is so strong, it's not in my favor to capture the bishop. I would likely have had to play d5, but then after rook takes e6, takes on e6, bishop takes c7, e7, I'm not making a queen because of this fabulous move, bishop d6. I can't check on f8, queens will be swapped and bishop takes f8. I can't make a queen because any moves like queen will allow this back rank checkmate, which means that after I take care of the back rank checkmate, we will get a queen and pawn endgame after bishop takes e7 that is likely going to be a draw. So a big miss by Peter. After the move g5 check, king h5, queen, bishop h2 check. Well, this was, as you can imagine, a real shock, as the queen is unleashed as well as the power of the rook. And the game really took on a kind of a roller coaster ride for me. King takes h2, rook takes h4 check, king g3, queen e5 check, knight f4 counter check, rook takes f4, queen takes h7 check, king takes g5, and we have this absolutely key position. I have a queen versus rook in my favor, but the problem is my king is exposed to a discovered check, and when the rook moves, it can attack any one of my two queens. There's also a perpetual check threatening on my home rank with the move queen e1. But white has a winning move, and I'd like to see if you can discover it. Spoiler alert, here it comes. The winning move is to put your faith in absolute pins. And in this case, the winning move is queen to c1. Now this rook absolutely cannot move as it's pinned to the king. There is no queen e1 check anymore, and the threat of queen h4 check is simply devastating. Queen c1, a winning move. After the move bishop h2 check, did you ask yourself, well, what would have happened if white didn't take the bishop? What happened if white played king h1 or king g2? Well, let's have a look. After the move king g2, queen b2 check, where on earth is the white king going to move? If the white king were to move to the h3 square, what would black do? Take your time. Spoiler alert, here comes the answer. Well, the answer is, are you paying attention to the rook on b4? Because after king h3, you're walking into a fatal blow. Rook on b4 captures h4 would be check and mate. The following game is one of my favorites. I've had a number of opponents in my career who I've had difficulties with. Ulf Anderson, Predrag Nikolic, Walter Brown all came to mind. My earliest and most difficult was Grandmaster Peter Biasis of Canada. Peter destroyed me in our early games, and they were not slugfest either. They just killed me. And so I wanted to play a game against Peter where I just played really conservatively, really defensively, and essentially try to hold the game. Well, let's see how I fared. As white, Peter had a stellar reputation for the king's Indian defense, where he fianchettos, he castles, plays d6, plays e5, and in the Pacific Northwest, checkmated a great number of his opponents. So what I did with the move bishop f4 is I created a kind of a London system. The idea is that this bishop is going to one day go back to h2, where it'll play a defensive role in helping my king. Again, Peter defeated a lot of players with direct kingside attacks, and I wanted that extra fortification of a bishop, and I wanted to play really conservatively. So the play went pretty straightforward. With this knight on d7, the bishop on c8 doesn't have a very good role. And so with the move b7, b6, it's very natural that the bishop would find itself on the long diagonal. So a double fianchetto for my opponent. Now I played the move a2, a4, and the idea is I'm not really of the mind that I want to expand in the center with the move e3, e4. Like maybe my center will be weakened if I try to play the move e3, e4. Neither do I want to expand on the king side with g2, g4, g5, which leaves the queen side. And with the move a4, I'd like to play a5, and maybe on a good day, this knight would go from a3 to b5, and somehow I put a little bit of pressure over there. So a4, bishop b7, and if my opponent wanted, he could have played the move a7, a6 to kind of slow me down on the queen side. In such a case, I would have probably played for more space on the queen side with the move b2, b4. Peter played bishop b7. I retreated my bishop, bishop h2. It very oftentimes happens that black either plays a knight h5 or a knight d5 or maybe an e7, e5, gains a tempo against the bishop on f4 at just the moment that you don't want to be hit with the tempo. So oftentimes as white, you just get your bishop out of the way so that down the line, the bishop will not be vulnerable to such attacks. Knight e4, a5. Okay, again, just getting a little bit of space on the queen side. Rook b8. And Peter prepares a counter-attacking idea that I wasn't a very big fan of. I didn't like the plan that Peter came up with. Now I played knight a3, and I'm starting to think about ideas like a6, closing down the queen side, followed by knight b5, taking a careful reading of the a7 pawn. Takes on d4, takes on d4, takes on a5. Again, these moves by Peter, I thought they were helping me. And considering that I had such a bad record against Peter, I was really, really pleased, in fact, by these trades. In my mind, I was thinking, okay, now I've got the half-open e-file. I'll bring a rook to e1, maybe a bishop on d3, and I'll try to put pressure on the pawn on e7. In the meanwhile, I can see that I will be able to play knight c4, followed by recapturing the pawn on a5, and maybe that pawn on a7 will become a target. The game continued. Knight c4, bishop a8, setting a small trap. It looks like I could easily capture this pawn on a5 with rook takes a5, but that would actually be a mistake because my knight on c4 would become an overworked piece. The knight on c4 has a dual purpose. It defends the rook on a5 and defends the pawn on b2 against the attack of the rook. Black could take the pawn on b2, and if I recapture, queen takes a5, and I've traded the double pawn on a5 for a very key base pawn on b2. Bad idea. But I saw that, fortunately for me, and I played queen c2, thinking I'm going to capture the a5 pawn in just a moment. Knight b6, knight takes a5, and there it goes. So at this point, this is almost kind of like a dream coming true for me. The position is super solid. I have a superior structure, and I'm looking at my king, and it's an incredibly safe king. Peter is nowhere close to checkmating me at all. I like my bishop on h2 as it looks down this diagonal and attacks a weak pawn on d6. In short, everything's going my way. Knight b3, attacking the pawn on a7. Now I'm thinking that, boy, on a good day, I'll just be able to double rooks and really start to tie Peter's position up a lot. Knight g5, opening up the diagonal for the bishop, but I thought that after trades, a couple of things have happened, and again, I considered those trades to be in my favor. First of all, now that bishop that was on a6 that might have been attacking, it's gone. It's off the board. And what remains on the board is a very safe white king. Again, look at white's king for a moment. There's no attackers anywhere near. And now what is revealed is this pawn on d6 is under attack, as is the pawn on a7. It's very easy to imagine that I'm ready to post up my rooks with rook a6 and rook a1. Well, at the moment, you might be saying to yourself, well, what is Yasser showing me? This looks like a positional victory, not a combinative victory. Why is he putting it in a book on winning chess combinations? Chill your jets. Rook b7, pawn to c4. So in my mind, I really like this move a lot. The move is designed to restrain the knight on b6. If I reasoned, if I could put my pawns on b3 as well as c4, then the knight on b6 can't jump forwards. And furthermore, it will be very easy for me to defend the pawn on b3, even with a move such as knight d2 as well as rook a3. So in my mind, this move c3, c4 was a really powerful move, which is designed to control black's knight. Queen d7, b2, b3 as advertised, and rook a6. And so this is just a dream come true. I mean, everything I'm doing is just picture perfect. I'm ready to double my rooks on the a file. Again, this pawn on b3, I'm thinking is easily defended. I can play rook a3. Maybe even on a good day, I can start advancing my pawns to c5 and b4. And keep in mind, this bishop on h2 is protecting the c7 square. So moves like c5 and c6 and c7 are going to be really, really powerful. Everything is going my way. Rook b4, rook a3. I had anticipated that Peter wanted to play queen b7, so I preemptively defended my pawn. Also, in my mind, what was going on was I was thinking that, like Alec Hines' gun, I wanted to play the move queen a2. I wanted to have the two rooks in front of my queen, so the queen acts as a kind of a trigger, and attack the pawn on a7, tie down my opponent's pieces to the defense of the a7 pawn. And like I said, c5, c6 is on my agenda. After queen b7, I thought, well, just a second. I remember who I am. I'm a pawn grabber, and I've already defended the pawn on b3, so I can just take this pawn on b6, d6, which is what I did, takes, and a5. So essentially, Peter just voluntarily jettisoned the pawn because he really didn't like his position, and he was hoping with a move like a4 to be able to get some counterplay against my king with rook b1 check and maybe rook b2. So here I played the move c5, which was in the back of my mind something that I wanted to do when the bishops were on the board. I had seen my best move. I had seen it quite some time before, and my best move is an obvious and easy one. Bring my knight to e5, centralize the knight. And because of the threat of rook d7, more or less provokes bishop takes, pawn to a4, and we get ourselves into a major piece ending of rooks and queens, where I'm a pawn ahead and I have every expectation of winning. Instead, I played the move c5, and I was horrified by what took place next. Bishop f8. And I saw this coming, and I just couldn't believe my eyes. I played the move c6, queen to c8, rook to d7. That's the only legal square for my rook where I don't hang it to a forced capture. And suddenly and shockingly comes the move rook b6. This is like a cold shower kind of moment for me, as this rook on a3, which was never under any kind of threats whatsoever, is suddenly on pre to the bishop. And at the same time, rook takes and queen takes d7 is going to capture that rook. So I'm just horrified by what I did. I just completely blew this beautiful, easy, flowing game. One of the games that I played against Peter in the past was Peter had played a little bit nonchalantly and he blundered a rook. He just, I'm a rook up. I'm a rook up. And there I was, a whole rook up, and Peter made a move and offered a draw. Well, I had just lost like 6 games in a row against Peter, and I didn't want to lose again. And even though I knew I was winning, I accepted the draw just to stop the curse. That's an important backdrop to what happens next. I played the move knight e5, and Peter, of course, took the rook. But here's what was going through my mind at the time that I played the move knight e5. I realized that I had blown it. Like, okay, that I just messed up, and the rook is hanging, the pawn is hanging. And I reasoned that the best thing that I could do in such a situation is just accept the fact that, hey, look, I dropped the rook, and to play the game as if it was an intentional sacrifice, not like something I was a blunder and I'm trying to get the material back, but an intentional sacrifice. And what I wanted to do, it was simply play for the attack. And in this position, I played the move queen e4. Why? If I take the pawn immediately with rook takes f7, the bishop will come back to the d6 square, where it will eliminate my knight. Then this pawn on c6 will fall, and I will be lost. So I played the move queen e4 to stop bishop d6, to get out of the way of rook takes c6 when the rook will be capturing and hitting my queen with a tempo. And I'm dreaming that the knight will capture on f7. I'll go knight h6, and maybe from the e4 square, if I can drive black's king into the corner, then I'll have queen e5 check. So here, queen e8, knight takes f7 was played, and Peter could capture my knight. And after rook takes, king takes, d5 was my intention. Rook e8, it's a massive, crazy variation that I had seen during the game. And I thought that after this very forced and crazy forced sequence of moves, we would get ourselves into a situation where I would have a queen against 2 rooks, and the game would likely be a draw. What happened was that earlier, Peter became aware that when he took my rook and played the move rook b6, hitting my rook on a3 and my pawn on c6, my face had blushed, and that I had blundered a rook. When I played the move knight takes f7, Peter also saw that drawing sequence of moves. But there was no way he was going to give me a draw after I blundered a rook. Unlike when he blundered a rook and offered a draw and I eagerly accepted, that was not going to happen. And from Peter's point of view, he was used to clobbering me, and I had made a mistake. And so instead of playing the move queen takes f7, which was the best move, he played the move bishop f8. And lo and behold, after that move bishop f8, I played the move knight g5, and suddenly and shockingly, even though I'm a rook behind, black is lost. It was really a stunning turn of events, as black is looking at knight takes h7 and knight f6 check and mating ideas. There are ideas of knight takes e6 and simply d4, d5 when I'm playing positionally a rook down, but thanks to my rook on d7, it's overwhelming. I have also threats of d5 directly as well, just d5 and taking on e6. and last but certainly not least, a combination of moves like, let's say rook takes b3, a move like d5, with the idea if you play e5, something even of this nature, queen h4, and the idea of dropping a knight on f6. So it was real shock for both of us when I got to this position after knight g5 and Peter realized, oh my goodness, the threats that I can muster against Black's king are decisive. The rook on d7 is so strong, it has to be taken out, and he played rook d8. Again, if you play a move like rook c8, hoping to eliminate this pawn, there is this really powerful move of d4, d5, which not only protects this pawn, but also sets up all of those patterns of motifs. Knight takes h7, queen h4, knight takes e6. So Peter played rook d8, rook takes d8, queen takes, king g7, queen check. We were in time trouble, and I just wanted to make the time control with these checks. Just noted that king h6 would have allowed a royal fork, and I would pick up Peter's queen. So he had to go back, queen e6 check, and now I played the decisive queen f7, king h6, c7. Wonderful. Again, game is over. Because the pawn is so powerful, Peter has to stop the pawn from promoting. He played queen c8. And this is just great. I'm completely winning the position. And I played the move h4, which really, even today, rather confuses me. Take a moment and see what you think I should have played. Imagine that you were white in this position, and what would be a good move in your opinion. I hope you have solved the question that I asked, what you think white should play. Obviously, with the knight and queen beautifully set up together, working in harmony, the move queen takes h7, check and mate is what you should have on your minds. I played the move h4, which was a mistake. Much, much stronger was the move f2, f4, defending the knight, threatening mate. If you found this yourselves, well done. That was the winning move. After, for example, bishop g7, the move I had missed was the really simple move, queen e7. And what's the point is that I'm setting up for knight f7 check, king h5, queen g5, check and mate. After rook f6, now I play the move g4, and there's really absolutely nothing that Black could do. For example, queen takes, knight check, and this mate is decisive. So that would have been the winning move. Fortunately for me, h2, h4 doesn't spoil anything. Not yet. Bishop g7, stopping queen h7 mate. And I thought, okay, it's terrific. I've got everything prepared. And I thought this move, knight e6, was the cat's meow. That was a move that just did everything. It defends the pawn on c7. It attacks the bishop on g7, so I'm threatening a mate with queen takes g7. The knight cannot be captured. Rook takes e6, queen f4, check, king h5, queen g5, checkmate. Very familiar checkmating pattern, which is why I played h4. And so here I just played this move knight e6, and literally I was expecting resigns because I just did not see the move that Peter played. And after the move bishop f6, oh my goodness, the game flares up yet again. While Peter was considering the move bishop f6, something even more offensive than the move bishop f6 caught my eye. It's very clear that I want to play the move queen f4 and queen g5 mate. Absolutely. And fleetingly, it went through my mind, what if he plays the move bishop e5? Stopping me from playing queen f4. If I take the bishop, well, he'll take my knight. And wait a minute, I am truly a rook down, and I better start thinking, like, how do I hit the panic button and start to save my position? And if I played the move d5, rook takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, I thought, well, okay, I'll play e7 and I must be winning, right? Because he can't stop me from queening my pawn. And by the way, I also have a threat of queen f8. Until, to my horror, I realized that after bishop d6, there's a threat of the back rank checkmating pattern. I don't have time to promote my pawn, so that after g2, g3, bishop takes, we're going to find ourselves in a queen and pawn ending. Oh my goodness. I was really sweating out the move bishop e5 when Peter played bishop d6. Normally, when opportunity strikes, Peter was really a very alert tactician. In this case, he missed a great chance with the move bishop e5. Played d5, just defending my knight, threatening his bishop. Now the bishop moved to e5, but that stutter step was a crucial loss of tempo, because after the move g4, I now set up another kind of checkmating pattern, one where I want to play moves either like f2, f3, but what I want to do is I want to play g5 and queen on f7 takes h7 checkmate when I've covered the g4 square. I played g4 and Peter played rook to b4, hoping that I would play g5, and after king h5, he's hoping that his king will be able to cross the fourth rank. I didn't allow that. I played the move f2, f3. Now I'm threatening the checkmating pattern that I wanted, which is g5 and queen h7. So queen h8. g5 check, king h8, queen. So once again, I thought, okay, now for sure, Peter absolutely has to resign because I've just made a queen. The queen cannot be captured. Queen takes c8 allows queen takes h7, check and mate. Peter played a move I hadn't anticipated. Bishop h2 check. Oh my goodness. In a panic, I like, what? How is that move even possible? Fleetingly, it went through my mind. If I take the bishop, he could take my pawn with check, and my king will be in check. His queen could go to b2 or maybe a1, depending on the circumstance, to give a check to my king. So I didn't want to take the bishop until I saw the variation king g2, queen b2, king h3, and I walk into a checkmate. Oh my goodness. So with my blood pumping and my face all bright red, I have played king takes h2, rook takes check, king g3, queen e5 check, Knight f4, check. Rook takes f4. In my head, I was just kind of swimming, shocked by all of the ups and downs, the roller coaster ride that I'm on. I'm going to pause at this moment and ask you, dear viewer, to try to solve the problems that I was faced with. If you were white in this situation, how would you handle the moment? Now, keep in mind, earlier in the course, you learned about perpetual checks with the queen. So I hope you spotted that queen takes f4 will allow black to make a perpetual check and to save the game. How can you win the game? One of the things that you absolutely have to do to become a formidable attacking player is to put your trust in absolute pins. How did I do that? I played the move queen takes h7 check, king takes. Now this rook on f4 is about to move with devastating effect, either a discovered check to pick up my queen, or even a move like rook g4 double check and potentially checkmating me. I don't want this rook on f4 to move, and so I put the rook on f4 in an absolute pin. If you saw the move queen c1, good for you, because you have solved the challenge. I didn't want the rook to move. And after queen c1, in fact, there was no move for Peter whatsoever. My threat is to play, for example, after a4, my threat is to take advantage of this rook being pinned, so queen h4, and to checkmate. And if Peter gets out of the pin with the move king f5, then I have queen f7 check, king g5, and similarly, I have the checkmate, this time on h4, also a very good pattern to know. Well, after queen c1 and Peter resigned, I took a deep breath and just thanked my lucky stars that I was so fortunate in this game. Later, I was delighted to learn that players who annotated the game considered it a brilliant rook sacrifice.